The cargo freighter Distant Meridian drifted through the cold emptiness of space. Far from any known trade routes, and even further from anything resembling home, Captain Marcus Cole stood at the helm, his weathered hands resting on the control panel as he watched the endless stars stretch out before him like scattered diamonds on black velvet. He was a tall man with broad shoulders and kind eyes that had seen too much hardship, but somehow never lost their warmth behind him. His navigator, Elena Chun, let out a sharp gasp that made him spin around instantly. "Captain, you need to see this," she said, her fingers flying across her console as data streamed across the screen. Marcus moved to her side and felt his stomach drop when he saw what the sensors had detected: a ship, alien in design with elegant curves and bioluminescent panels, floated dead in the void near an uncharted asteroid field. No power signatures, no life support readings. Nothing but a metal tomb spinning slowly in the darkness. "We should keep moving," Elena warned, her voice tight with fear. "That is a Volanthi royal vessel, and whatever happened to it is none of our business." Marcus knew she was right in the logical sense. The Volanthi Dominion was one of the most powerful empires in known space. An insectoid species known for their cold calculations and complete lack of anything resembling mercy. Humans were newcomers to the galactic stage, barely tolerated by the elder races, and certainly not welcome to interfere in Volanthi affairs. But Marcus had been a combat medic before he became a traitor, and some instincts ran deeper than common sense. "There might be survivors," he said quietly. "There might be danger." Elena countered, "Then stay here with the ship." He did not wait for her response before heading to the airlock. Grabbing his emergency medical kit and a plasma cutter on his way, walk through the connecting tunnel felt like it lasted forever, each step taking him closer to whatever horror awaited inside that silent vessel. When the airlock finally hissed open, the smell hit him first, a strange mix of copper and something sweet. Like burned honey, his flashlight cut through the darkness and revealed a scene of absolute carnage. Bodies lay everywhere. Volanthi warriors in ornate armor with their exoskeletons cracked open and their luminescent blood painting the walls in patterns of fading blue. Marcus counted at least 12 dead in the first corridor alone, each one killed with precision strikes that spoke of professional assassins rather than random attack. He moved deeper into the ship, stepping carefully over the fallen and checking each body for signs of life. Even though he knew it was hopeless, the throne room was the worst. More bodies here, these ones wearing the elaborate markings of royal guards, the most elite warriors the Dominion could produce. They had died protecting someone, forming a circle around the central throne with their weapons drawn and their faces frozen in expressions of fierce determination. And on that throne, slumped forward with ichor pooling beneath her, sat the most magnificent creature Marcus had ever seen. She was clearly Volanthi, with the same insectoid features as the other's: compound eyes, mandibles, forearms ending in delicate clawed hands, and an exoskeleton that shimmered with colors humans did not have names for. But where the guards were built for war, this one was built for something else entirely. Her form was elegant, almost fragile, with patterns on her carapace that pulsed weakly with inner light like a dying heartbeat. A queen. Marcus realized with a shock that nearly made him drop his medical knife was looking at a Volanthi queen, one of only a handful of beings in the entire Dominion capable of producing the next generation of their species, and she was dying. For a long moment, Marcus simply stood there, paralyzed by the weight of the situation. If he walked away now, no one would ever know the Volanthi would find their queen eventually, and humans would remain uninvolved in whatever political nightmare had caused this massacre. It was the smart choice, the safe choice, the choice any reasonable person would make. Marcus was not always reasonable. He crossed the room in quick strides and knelt beside the throne, his hands already moving to assess her injuries, even before his mind fully committed to the decision. The damage was severe deep cracks in her thoracic plates, internal bleeding that had turned her bioluminescence from bright blue to sickly green, and something that looked disturbingly like poison spreading through her system in dark tendrils. "Hey," he said softly, knowing she probably could not hear him but needing to say something anyway. "My name is Marcus, and I'm going to help you, okay?" Her compound eyes flickered, thousands of tiny lenses focusing on his face with obvious confusion. "Human," she whispered, her voice like wind chimes made of crystal. "You should not be here." "Yeah, I get that a lot." He opened his medical kit and started working, adapting techniques designed for human physiology to this completely alien body through a combination of intuition, desperation, and what Elena would later call idiotic luck. The poison was the biggest threat. Some kind of engineered toxin designed specifically to kill Volanti royalty. Marcus did not have an antidote, but he had something almost as good, a universal blood filter he had bought from a Corvani trader 3 years ago and never expected to actually use. He hooked it up to what he hoped was a major blood vessel and prayed to whatever gods might be listening that Volanti biology was compatible enough for this to work while the filter did its job. He turned his attention to the physical wounds. Volanti exoskeletons were not so different from the chitin of earth insects, and Marcus had learned long ago that medical sealant worked on almost anything. If you applied enough of, I'd worked through the night, talking to the queen the whole time, even when she lost consciousness. He told her about Earth, about blue skies and green forests and oceans so vast you could sail for weeks without seeing land. He told her about his crew, about Elena, who pretended to be tough but cried at sad movies, about old Tom in engineering, who could fix anything with enough wire and profanity. He told her about humanity, about their wars and their kindness, their terrible mistakes and their stubborn refusal to ever give up hope. Somewhere around the 4th hour, her eyes opened again. "Why?" she asked, her voice stronger now, but filled with genuine confusion. "Why would you risk yourself for a stranger?" Marcus paused in his work and considered the question seriously. "Because you were hurt," he finally said, "and I could help." She stared at him for a long moment, those alien eyes searching his face for some hidden motive, some angle he was playing. She found nothing but simple sincerity, and that seemed to confuse her more than anything else. "You do not know what you have done." "Human, I saved your life, I think." "Yes," she said, and something in her voice made Marcus suddenly nervous. "You have invoked Kalthara, the life debt, and by the ancient laws of my people, I am now bound to you until that debt is repaid." Marcus blinked several times, trying to process this information. "I am sorry, what?" "My name is Civilizara, Queen of the Volanti Dominion," she continued, her mandibles clicking in what might have been amusement at his expression. "And you, Marcus the Human, have just become the most important person in my empire, back on the distant meridian." Elena was going to kill him, assuming the Volanti did not do it first. Marcus had planned to drop Queen Civilizara at the nearest starport and continue on his way like nothing had happened. The universe, it seemed, had other plans. 3 days after the rescue, a Volanti battle fleet materialized around the distant meridian with enough firepower to reduce the small cargo ship to atoms in approximately half a second. Marcus stood on his bridge, watching dozens of warships form a perfect sphere around his vessel, and wondered if this was how his story would end, vaporized by the very people he had tried to help. Then the Queen's voice came over the communication system, sharp and commanding in a way that made even Marcus stand a little straighter. "This human is under my protection," she declared to her fleet. "He carries the mark of Kalthara, and any who harm him will answer to me personally." The weapons powered down almost instantly. What followed was less of an invitation and more of a polite kidnapping. The Queen required an escort back to her throne world of Kethvalar, and by ancient law, Her Kelthara bondholder was required to witness her restoration to power. Marcus tried to explain that he had a schedule to keep, contracts to fulfill, a business to run. Sevlith simply looked at him with those impossible compound eyes and said, "Your debts will be paid and your contracts honored. This, I swear, is Queen." And that was apparently the end of the discussion. The journey to Kethvalan took 2 weeks, during which Marcus learned more about Volanthi culture than he had ever wanted to know. They were an ancient species, older than humanity by several 100,000 years, with traditions and laws so complex that understanding them required a lifetime of study. Everything had meaning in Volanthi society: the way you held your hands, the angle of your head, the pattern of your words. Even silence had rules. The Queen spent hours each day teaching him the basics, which she assured him would be enough to avoid immediate execution. Upon arrival, Marcus was not entirely comforted by the word immediate. Elena and the rest of the crew had been offered the choice to leave, but they refused with a loyalty that made Marcus's chest tight with emotion. "You got us into this mess," Elena had said with a grim smile. "The least we can do is watch you stumble through it." Kethvalan was nothing like Marcus had imagined. He had expected something cold and functional, all sharp angles and military precision. Instead, the Volanthi throne world was beautiful beyond description. Crystal spires rose from the surface like frozen music, catching the light of 3 suns and scattering rainbows across cities that seemed grown rather than built. Gardens of bioluminescent plants created rivers of color through the streets, and the air smelled sweet and clean in a way Earth had not known for centuries. The royal palace was the most magnificent structure of all, a living organism of crystal and chitin that pulsed with the heartbeat of the entire Dominion. Marcus walked through its halls beside the Queen, painfully aware of every eye watching them. The Volanthi court was not happy about his presence. He could feel their disapproval like heat from a fire, burning against his skin with every step. A human in the sacred halls of the Dominion was unprecedented and unwelcome. A human bound to their queen by Kelthara was something close to blasphemy. On his first day, Marcus committed 47 cultural offenses before lunch. He made eye contact with a noble who outranked him, which was apparently a challenge to combat. He touched food before the Queen had taken her first bite, which was an insult to her generosity. He asked the guard how his day was going, which was so far outside Volanthi social norms that the poor warriors simply froze and had to be led away for psychological treatment. But his worst offense, the one that would be talked about in Volanthi courts for generations to come, happened during the formal dinner welcoming the Queen back to her throne. Marcus told a joke. It was not even a particularly good joke, something about a cargo pilot and a malfunctioning airlock that he had heard in a bar on some forgotten station years ago. But the Queen, exhausted from politics and still healing from her wounds, and perhaps a little drunk on the ceremonial nectar that served as Volanthi wine, did something she had never done in her entire 300 years of life. She laughed, not a polite chuckle or a diplomatic smile, but a genuine laugh that made her whole body shake and her bioluminescent markings flash in unpredictable patterns. The entire room went silent. Volanthi did not laugh. It was considered a loss of control, a display of emotion that no proper member of their species would ever show in public. And here was their Queen, laughing like a newly hatched juvenile at a human stupid joke. Marcus knew he had made a terrible mistake, but when he looked at Sivlith and saw the joy in her eyes, he could not bring himself to regret it. In the days that followed, the Queen's enemies began to circle. Lord Executor Vrethkan was the most dangerous of them, a towering Volanthi warrior who had wanted the throne for himself and saw the failed assassination as merely a setback rather than a defeat. He watched Marcus with obvious hatred, his mandibles clicking in patterns that even without translation clearly meant, "I will destroy you." Marcus did his best to stay out of politics, But politics would not stay out of him as the Queen's bondholder. He was expected to attend meetings, observe treaties, witness judgments. He understood perhaps one word in 20, but he was learning, and more importantly, he was watching the Volante court operated on intricate rules of status and precedent. Every interaction a careful dance of power and submission. But Marcus had grown up on the streets of New Chicago, where the rules were simpler but no less deadly. He recognized the patterns. The alliances forming, the betrayals brewing, the slow tightening of a noose around the Queen's neck. "They're going to move against you again," he told her one night, standing on the balcony of her private chambers and watching the moons rise over the crystal city. Sivlith joined him at the railing, her presence warm despite her cold-blooded nature. "I know," she said quietly. "Vrethkan has been consolidating power since my absence, and my bond with you has given him the excuse he needs to challenge my fitness for rule. Then break the bond," Marcus offered, even though something in his chest ached at the thought. "Tell them it was a mistake, a moment of weakness." She turned to look at him, and in the moonlight, her compound eyes seemed almost soft. "You do not understand, Marcus. Kalthar is not just a law, it is a biological reality. When you saved my life, something connected between us, something that cannot be undone." He felt it then, just for a moment, a brush against his mind like fingers trailing through water, her presence, her emotions, her very essence touching his in a way that should have been impossible. "Oh," he said, because no other words seemed adequate. "Yes," she agreed. "Oh." They stood in silence for a long time. Two beings from completely different worlds, bound together by an act of simple kindness that neither of them fully understood. Somewhere in the palace below, Vrethkan was planning his next move, but up here, in the quiet of the night, Marcus made a decision. He had saved this woman's life, and whether the universe liked it or not, he was going to keep her safe. The Volante court had no idea what they were dealing with. Humans did not abandon their own. And somewhere along the way, Queen Sivlith Ara had become his. The first assassination attempt came on a quiet morning when Marcus was walking through the palace gardens alone. He'd been admiring the bioluminescent flowers, thinking how much his mother would have loved to see them, when a shadow detached from the crystal wall and lunged at him with a blade designed to pierce Volante armor. Marcus was not wearing Volante armor. He was wearing a cotton shirt and cargo pants, which offered about as much protection as wet paper. But he was also a human who had grown up fighting for every scrap of food and every moment of safety, and his body reacted before his mind caught up. He dodged left, grabbed the assassin's wrist, and used the attacker's own momentum to throw them face first into a decorative fountain. The Volante warrior surfaced, spluttering and clearly shocked that a soft little mammal had just dunked him like a basketball. Marcus did not give him time to recover. 3 punches and an elbow strike later, the assassin was unconscious, and Marcus was standing over him with bloody knuckles and a racing heart. The royal guards arrived 30 seconds too late, finding their queen's bondholder surrounded by broken flowers and breathing hard over a defeated enemy. They looked at Marcus with something that might have been respect or possibly just confusion. The second attempt was more sophisticated poison in his food, a slow-acting toxin that would have killed any Volante within hours. Marcus ate 3 full portions before anyone realized something was wrong. And even then, the only symptom he showed was mild indigestion. Human biology, it turned out, was remarkably resistant to Volante poisons, the chemicals that would dissolve insectoid organs from the inside simply passed through his mammalian system like a bad burrito. The palace physicians were fascinated. Vretham was furious. The third attempt was the most dangerous. A coordinated attack by 6 warriors during a formal ceremony. They burst through the doors with weapons drawn, heading straight for the queen with murder in their compound eyes. Marcus did not think He simply moved, putting himself between Scivilith and the assassins with nothing but his bare hands and an absolute refusal to let anyone hurt her. What followed was the most brutal 30 seconds of his Lanti warriors were stronger than humans, faster than humans, with natural weapons built into their very bodies, but they had never fought a human before. And they had no idea what they were dealing with. Marcus took wounds that would have killed any Volanthi, a blade through his shoulder, claws across his chest, a kick that cracked 3 ribs, and he kept fighting. He kept fighting because behind him was a woman who had somehow become the most important person in his universe. And he would rather die than see her hurt by the time the royal guards finally intervened. 4 of the assassins were down, and Marcus was working on the 5th. He collapsed immediately after, his body finally acknowledging the damage he had ignored through sheer willpower. The queen caught him before he hit the ground. "You fool," she whispered, her voice cracking with an emotion Volanthi were not supposed to feel. "You absolute fool. Why would you do that?" Marcus looked up at her through fading vision and managed a weak smile. "Because you were in danger," he said. "And I can help." She made a sound that might have been a laugh or might have been a sob, and held him close as the physicians rushed to save his life. He spent 2 weeks in the healing chambers, drifting in and out of consciousness while Volanthi medical technology worked to repair damage that should have been fatal. And through it all, the queen stayed by his side. They talked during his waking hours, really talked in a way they had not before. Scivilith told him about her life, the crushing weight of duty, the loneliness of a crown, the centuries spent surrounded by subjects who saw only her title and never her heart. She had been bred for royalty, engineered from birth to be the perfect queen. And sometimes she wondered if there was anything left of her beneath all the expectations. Marcus told her about Earth, about the wars that had nearly destroyed humanity and the stubborn hope that had saved them. He told her about his family, lost to violence when he was young, and the years he spent wandering the stars looking for somewhere to belong. "I think I understand now," Sivilla said one night, her hand resting gently on his healing chest. "Why you stopped for a stranger in the void, yeah? You were looking for someone to save," she said softly. "Because no one saved you." Marcus was quiet for a long moment, feeling the truth of her words settle into his bones. "Maybe," he admitted. "Or maybe I just hate bullies." She laughed at that, and Marcus realized he would do anything to hear that sound again. The Kelthara bond had grown stronger with each act of protection, each moment of shared vulnerability. What started as a formal obligation had become something neither of them expected, a genuine connection that transcended species and culture and every logical objection. The universe could raise the Volanthi court whispered of scandale. Queen bonding with a mammal was unthinkable, a violation of everything their society held sacred. Vrethkin used the growing attachment as evidence of her unfitness, claiming she had been corrupted by the alien influence and needed to be removed for the good of the Dominion. But Scivilith no longer cared what they whispered for. The first time in her ancient life, someone saw her as more than a queen. Marcus saw her as Scivilith, a woman who laughed at bad jokes and worried about her people and stayed up too late reading human poetry because she found the emotional honesty fascinating. He saw her, and he did not look away. The final confrontation came on a stormy night when the 3 moons hid behind clouds and the crystal spires sang mournful songs in the wind. Vrethkin's forces cornered them in the queen's private chambers, surrounding the room with enough warriors to overwhelm even the royal guard. "It ends here," the Lord Executor declared, his mandibles spreading in a gesture of triumph. "The queen is clearly unfit for rule, corrupted by this human infection, and I hereby invoke the right of succession." Scivilith stood tall despite the fear. Marcus could feel through their bond. "You have no right," she said coldly. I am queen by blood and law, and I am stronger, Vrethkin replied. Which is the only law that matters. He raised his blade, ready to end 300 years of rule with a single strike, and then Marcus stepped forward. I invoke Valkith, he said, his voice steady despite the impossibility of what he was doing. The royal challenge. As is my right as the queen's bondholder. The room went absolutely still. Valkith had not been invoked in 3,000 years. It was an ancient ritual, designed for Volanti warriors to prove their worth. Through combat and trial, no human had ever attempted it, no alien had ever. Dared Vrethkin's eyes narrowed with cruel amusement. You invoke Valkith, he repeated slowly, savoring each word. Do you even understand what that means, little mammal? It means I fight for her, Marcus said simply, and if I win, you lose everything. He felt Sivila's hand on his arm. Felt her terror through the bond. Marcus, no. You cannot possibly. Watch me, he said, and turned to face the enemy with nothing but human stubbornness and a love he was only beginning to understand. The permanent challenge had been issued. There was no going back now. The arena of ascension had not seen blood in 3,000 years, built in an age when the Volanti still settled their disputes through ritual combat. It was a massive crystalline structure that could hold 1,000,000 spectators and had acoustics so perfect that a whisper at its center could be heard in the highest seats today. Every seat was filled. They had come from across the Dominion to witness the chaos. Impossible, a human challenging for the right to stand beside a Volanti queen. Most had come expecting to watch him. Marcus stood in the center of the arena, wearing simple clothes because the Volanti had no armor that fit human proportions, and he had refused their offer to fight naked above him. Queen Sivilith Ara sat on the royal observation platform, her face a mask of calm that could not quite hide her terror through their bond. Marcus could feel her heart racing as fast as his own. The challenger will face 3 trials, announced the voice of the arena, an ancient Volanti whose job was to narrate these events. The trial of form to prove the body, the trial of mind to prove the intellect, and the trial of spirit to prove the soul. Only by passing all 3 may the challenger earn the right of Valkith. The crowd clicked their mandibles in anticipation. Marcus just nodded and tried not to throw up. The trial of form came first. Gates on the far side of the arena opened, and out walked the largest Volanti Marcus had ever seen. Champion Kethvern was a legend among his people, undefeated in over 200 ritual combats. With an exoskeleton so thick it was said to turn aside plasma fire, his 4 arms each held a different weapon, and his compound eyes showed nothing but cold confidence. Little mammal, Kethvern said as he approached. I will try to make this quick. Marcus raised his fists, all too aware of how ridiculous he must look. I appreciate that. The champion attacked with blinding speed, his weapons blurring through the air in patterns designed to overwhelm and destroy. Marcus dodged the first strike by pure instinct. Feeling the blade pass close enough to trim his hair, he dodged the second and third, backing away rapidly while his mind raced to find some kind of strategy. The 4th strike caught him across the arm, opening a wound that immediately began dripping blood onto the white sand of the arena. The crowd roared with approval. But Marcus had learned something from that exchange. Kethvern was fast, but he was also predictable. 300 years of easy victories had made him arrogant. Confident that no opponent could possibly threaten him, he attacked with power, not creativity. Marcus stopped retreating. The next strike came for his head, and instead of dodging, he ducked underneath it and drove his fist into the soft joint where the champion's lower arm met his. Thorax. Kethvern made a sound of shocked pain. Volanti were armored on the outside, but their joints were vulnerable. Marcus had noticed that during his weeks in the palace, watching guards and servants move through their daily routines. He had hoped he would never need the information. Now it was the only thing keeping him alive. What followed was not elegant or beautiful, it was brutal and desperate. A smaller creature fighting for survival against a larger predator. Through sheer stubbornness and creative violence, Marcus took wounds that would have killed him 3 times over. But he kept moving, kept striking, kept targeting those vulnerable joints until Cathvern could barely lift his weapons. The final blow came when the champion overextended on a killing strike, and Marcus grabbed his arm, used his momentum against him, and threw him to the ground with every ounce of strength he had left. The impact cracked Cathvern's chest plate. Did not get up. The arena was silent for a long moment, then erupted in chaos, some cheering, some jeering. All of them utterly shocked that the human was still stabbing Marcus, just focused on breathing and trying not to fall down. Trial of mind came next. They led into a smaller chamber beneath the arena, where a holographic display showed a complex military simulation. 3 of the Dominion's greatest tactical minds sat waiting, their expressions clearly skeptical of this bleeding mammal who had somehow survived the first trial. The scenario is this, one of them explained. You command a fleet of 50 vessels against an enemy force of 200. Your goal is to protect a civilian transport carrying irreplaceable genetic material. You have 1 hour. Marcus studied the display, his mind racing despite his exhaustion. The Volanti expected him to fight like a Volanti, logical, calculated, playing by the rules of engagement that had governed their warfare for millennia. So he did something else entirely. 20 minutes into the simulation, Marcus ordered his entire fleet to power down and play dead. The tactician stared at him like he had lost his mind when the enemy fleet approached to finish off the disabled ships. Marcus ordered a full restart and devastated them at point-blank range before they could react. The survivors fled, and Marcus used the chaos to slip the civilian transport through the now empty space they had abandoned. That, one of the tacticians said slowly, is cheating. That, Marcus replied, is winning. They could not argue with the results. The final trial was the one Marcus feared most. The trial of spirit required him to open his mind to the Queen, proving his intentions were pure and his heart was true for a Volanti. This was a simple matter of lowering mental barriers and allowing inspection for a human, whose mind was a storm of emotion and memory and chaos that no Volanti had ever touched. It could be anything from uncomfortable to lethal. Sivlith descended from her platform and approached him slowly, her eyes filled with something that looked like apology. I will be as gentle as I can, she said softly. But this will hurt. I know. She placed her hands on either side of his face, and suddenly Marcus was drowning. Images flooded through him. Every moment of fear, every act of violence, every shameful thought he had ever had laid bare before her alien consciousness. He felt her presence moving through his memories like a surgeon, examining the foundations of his soul with clinical precision. She saw the boy who watched his family die and could do nothing. She saw the young man who fought and stole and did terrible things to survive. She saw the soldier who saved lives and took them, who came home broken and spent years putting himself back together. And then she saw herself. She saw how he looked at her, not as a queen or an alien or a political asset, but as a woman. She saw the moment he decided to save her, not because of duty or advantage, but simply because she was hurt and he could help. She saw the love that had grown in his chaotic human heart, wild and fierce and utterly sincere when she withdrew from his mind. There were tears in her compound eyes. His spirit is true, she announced to the arena, her voice carrying across the million witnesses. He fights not for power or glory, but for love. The crowd exploded into noise, outrage from some, wonder from others, confusion from nearly all, but Marcus barely heard them. He was looking at Sivlith, seeing the same impossible emotion reflected in her alien eyes. He had won. He had actually won. And then the Queen did something that would echo through Volanti history for the next 10,000 years. She took his hand in the ancient gesture of Valthara, the first step of the royal mating bond. Broadcast to every screen in the entire Dominion, Marcus had just become the most controversial figure in Volanti history, and looking at the woman holding his hand, he could not bring himself to care. The galaxy had opinions about the human who married a queen, the Galactic Council. That august body of elder races who govern a known universe with centuries of tradition and bureaucracy was in absolute chaos. Emergency sessions were called, ancient treaties were consulted, and beings who had not spoken to each other in millennia suddenly found common ground in their shared confusion. A human, a member of a species barely out of its gravity well, still considered newcomers to the cosmic stage, had somehow become the royal consort of the Volanti Dominion. It was unprecedented. It was scandalous. It was, according to at least 3 council members, probably illegal under laws that had never needed to address such a situation, because no one had ever imagined it could happen. Human diplomats were torn between horror at the political complications and barely contained glee at the opportunities overnight. Humanity had gone from a minor trading species to the in-laws of one of the most powerful empires in known space. Implications were staggering. Marcus tried very hard to ignore all of it, had never wanted to be important, had never asked to be the center of a galactic controversy, had never expected his life to become a constant parade of diplomatic meetings and ceremonial functions, and reporters asking how it felt to be the first human to achieve interspecies marriage with insectoid royalty. Weird, he told them honestly. It feels really weird. His crew had become celebrities in their own right. Elena was making a fortune selling exclusive interviews about the captain who rescued a queen, carefully editing out the parts where she had begged him to leave the dying ship alone. Tom had written a memoir that was climbing the bestseller lists across 12 systems. Even the distant Meridian had become famous. Preserved in the palace hangar as a historical artifact that school groups came to visit. But in the quiet moments, when the politics faded and the reporters went home, Marcus found something he had never expected. He found peace. The royal chambers were vast and strange, filled with technology he did not understand and decorations whose meanings he could only guess. But when Civilith was beside him, none of that mattered. They talked for hours about everything and nothing: Earth poetry and Volanti philosophy, human history and Dominion tradition, the small details of their utterly different lives that somehow fit together like puzzle pieces. She taught him to read the bioluminescent patterns that Volanti used for emotional expression. He taught her to appreciate the chaotic beauty of jazz music. They argued about whether coffee or nectar was the superior morning drink, and Marcus privately considered it the best argument he had ever had. The physical differences between them remained significant. She was taller than him by half a meter. Her exoskeleton required constant humidity that left the chambers feeling like a tropical greenhouse, and her compound eyes still sometimes unnerved him when he woke up to find them watching him in the darkness. But love, Marcus was learning, did not care about logical obstacles. It simply was burning bright, despite every reason it should not exist. 3 months after the wedding, Civilith asked him to sit with her in the garden where they had first talked about the future. Her bioluminescence was flickering in patterns he had never seen before, nervousness mixed with hope, mixed with something that looked almost like fear. "There is something I must tell you," she said, her voice softer than he had ever heard it. "Something I did not believe was possible." Marcus took her hand, feeling the familiar warmth of her presence through their bond. "Whatever it is, we will figure it out together." She was quiet for a long moment, her eyes watching the twin moons rise over the crystal spires. Volanti queens can only reproduce when they find a bondmate whose essence complements their own, she finally said. "It is why we are so rare, The matching is precise. Impossible with any but the perfect partner, Marcus nodded, remembering the biological lessons she had shared during their long talks. The Kelthara bond connected us in ways I did not expect, Sivlith continued. And the Velthara ceremony deepened that connection beyond anything my physicians have ever documented. She turned to face him, and in the moonlight he could see the tears forming in her compound eyes. Marcus, I am expectant. The words did not make sense at first. His brain processed them, turned them over, examined them from multiple angles, like a puzzle he could not quite solve. Expectant, he repeated slowly. You mean, I carry the first hybrid clutch in Valanthi history, she said, her voice breaking with emotion. Our children grow within me. Impossible children who should not exist, who defy everything we know about biology and genetics and the boundaries between species. Marcus sat in stunned silence for what felt like an eternity. Then he started laughing. It was not the response Sivlith had expected, and she stared at him with obvious concern. Marcus, I am sorry, he managed between gasps of laughter. I stopped to help a stranded ship. That is all I did. I just stopped to help someone who was hurt. And now I am married to a queen and apparently going to be a father to an entirely new species. He looked at her, at this magnificent creature who had somehow become the center of his universe, and felt his laughter transform into something else, something deeper and more profound. Our children, he said softly, testing the words. I like the sound of that. Sivlith made a sound that was halfway between a sob and a laugh of her own. You are not frightened? Terrified, he admitted, but also excited and proud. And so incredibly grateful that my ship happened to pass that asteroid field at exactly the right moment. He pulled her close, feeling the pulse of new life between them through the bond they shared. The universe remembers every kindness, Sivlith whispered, quoting the ancient Valanthi saying, I never understood what that meant until now. Marcus placed his hand against her abdomen, where bioluminescent patterns were already beginning to pulse with colors no one had ever seen before, his children human and Valanthi combined. A bridge between two species that had never imagined they could have anything in common. The galaxy was going to have opinions about this. Too, the council would convene emergency sessions. The diplomats would scramble to understand the implications. And beings across 1,000 worlds would debate what it meant for the future of their universe. But here, in the quiet of the garden, Marcus did not care about any of that. He cared about the woman in his arms and the impossible future growing inside her. You realize, Sivlith said, looking at him with those alien eyes that had become the most beautiful thing he had ever seen, that you have altered the course of my entire species. Marcus grinned, feeling the same stubborn hope that had driven him to help a dying stranger in the void. Sweetheart, I am human. It is what we do. She laughed, and the sound echoed off the crystal spires like music somewhere across the stars. The crew of the distant Meridian raised glasses to their captain somewhere in the council chambers. Diplomats argued about what this all meant for the future, somewhere in the darkness of space. Other beings looked at the news and wondered what kind of creature would risk everything for a stranger. But Marcus was not thinking about any of that. He was thinking about bedtime stories and first steps and teaching his children to appreciate jazz. He was thinking about the family he had lost and the family he had found. He was thinking about how everything wonderful in his life had started with the simplest of choices, the choice to help someone who needed it, without asking for anything in return. It was, he reflected, a very human thing to do. He would not have it any other way.